Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Undertaking, the Colts, episode 4. Today's episode is going to be the Colts at the Houston Texans preview. Game scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. It will be in Houston at NRG Stadium, although I think they've renamed that field. Renamed it a couple times in the last few years. I can't remember. But anyway, I'm Blake Waters, joined again here by Jordan Brock, and we're looking forward to bringing this episode to you. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Jordan, let's just kick it off right away. Both teams are 0-1 going into this stadium where historically the Colts have had great success. I know we have fond memories of T.Y. Hilton and Andrew Luck absolutely torching them, and even further back, Peyton and Reggie, Peyton and Dallas Clark, Marvin, the list goes on. Ever since they came into the league in 2002, Colts have really had the Texans number historically. However, here in 2023, it is vastly different. Both teams have rookie starting quarterbacks, young rosters, new head coaches. I really think that this could be a reset button in terms of this series or rivalry, whatever you want to call this, interdivision matchup. So, Jordan, before we really get into this, what's kind of your overviewing thought of this game on Sunday?
Yeah. So, I mean, to start off, to address a couple things you mentioned there, going back to the Texans over the years, two fond memories I gotta touch on was the T.Y. Hilton clown mask.
Oh, I was
one of
actually
my
just
favorites.
thinking that in my head. That was such an amazing game, a clown game, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. And then the Sage Rosenfeld helicopter game. I don't know if you remember that
Oh,
when
where he just got
I think it was
spun
like
around like a topsy-turvy. Oh, whew.
yeah. Who was that? Gary Brackett returned it for a touchdown, and then I think we were down 2 touchdowns, and we came back with like 4 minutes to go and
Yes,
scored.
that was
So
an amazing
um,
game to watch.
those are some fun memories of waxing the Texans over the years. But like you said, I do agree. I think that we're seeing a little bit of a reset button here in terms of
Mhm.
two young coaches coming in here, leading these teams with a full reset, really. New quarterbacks, new coaches, total change in style, really. I think for the Texans with becoming more of a defensive minded team. So, um, I'm not really sure what to make of this game, to be honest with you. I think I've got some thoughts here, in terms of what I think may happen, that I'll dive into later. But early thoughts are both teams kind of struggled on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm curious to see how they react here in week 2.
Yeah. And that kind of brings up the case of, you know, going back to, several years of Colts versus Texans, regardless where the stadium has been. I haven't looked this up yet, but I'm pretty sure the Colts have won well over 2/3 of the matchups, dating for the past 20, 21 years. And but I will give the Houston Texans credit this. They've always played us well, with the exceptions of the couple years when they were really bad and we were really good, and vice versa. Because if you remember back, it was like the mid 2010s or late 2010s, somewhere in that area, the Matt Schaub era, when they had an amazing amount of players in their prime. Matt Schaub was the quarterback, led them to the division title a couple of times. They had receivers like Andre Johnson, a young DeAndre Hopkins. They had a really stout offensive line too. I think a prime Dwayne Brown, who's still in the league as the left tackle of the Jets right now. And they had just, of course, a prime J.J. Watt, who was outside of Aaron Donald, probably the most disruptive defensive force that this league has seen since Lawrence Taylor. If I'm going to be completely honest here, he affected the game so much and was able to be a one-man wrecking crew. And he did that quite a few times against us, which J.J. Watt now being retired, me personally, I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But enough of reveling in the past. Let's keep on to the present. So right now, as it stands, there is, in the AFC South alone, Jacksonville is the only team that came out of week 1 with victory over the Colts, as we discussed last episode. Houston lost their game, although they were competitive. Tennessee, who has had a recent run of great success, Ryan Tannehill struggled immensely in week one, throwing 3 interceptions. They fell to 0-1, and then of course we're 0-1, having taken that loss. So early, after the first week of the season, really hard telling how everything's going to go, how everything's going to play out, because as it's been stated, the Colts and Texans are very young. Tennessee, while they have struggled, starting this year and into last year, Tennessee still has a track record based off of their head coach, Mike Vrabel, who I have immense respect for. He coaches very hard, coaches very honest and upfront, and I really respect that out of him. Ryan Tannehill has had some great years, and then of course Derrick Henry, who has either haunted us for 200 yards or we've stuffed him for 1.7 yards a carry or less. Home run or miss. So you got to give Tennessee their respect. You've got to, of course, respect Jacksonville, who's the defending AFC South champions. But the Texans and the Colts right now, I think, are the absolute wild cards right now in the AFC South. And this early interdivision matchup, I think, can go a long way in not just developing either team, win or lose, but can really set the tone for what the next 10 to 12 years is going to be like inside the division. Kind of give me your thoughts right now on the AFC South picture.
Yeah, I mean, everybody before the season was ready to crown the Jaguars, as AFC South champion before we even played a down of football.
And
I
respectfully
think
so.
right, right. But I mean, I thought, I don't know, we talked in our last episode. The Colts impressed me more than I expected them to.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Jags look human. Um, that being said, the rest of the AFC South didn't make much of a case in Week 1 for them taking the crown. So, I think the Jags are definitely still going to be the team to beat here. But I would not be surprised if we saw the Colts win some games they're not supposed to, the Texans win some games they're not supposed to. The Titans, really, to me, I think they're on the back end of their window of
I would
winning.
agree.
Tannehill's, like you said, getting up there in age. Derrick Henry, he had a pretty good run, and he may still, he's still pretty young, but I don't know that he provides them, the winning offense that they anticipated. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when they traded away, was it AJ
Yep.
Brown? I mean, I think they thought that Derrick Henry was going to lead them into the promised land, and we see how that's going with NFL running backs this day and age. So, like I said, I think the Jags are the team to beat, but I would not be surprised if some of these other guys made some noise. I think it's a much closer division than really what it was, stamped before the season.
Yeah. And let's dive deep into really the Colts and Texans, because they are the dark horses right now of the division of the AFC, because the AFC as a whole is really strong, and it's either you're up there in the elite playoff contention or you're not. There's no middle of the ground. There's no coin toss, ifs, ands, or maybe. It's you're there or you're not. And it's all, of course, surrounded by the quarterback position, as has been discussed on many media outlets, both national, local, podcasts, whomever you may listen to or watch. The quarterback position in the AFC is really the determining factor as of right now, September 14th at 10:12 p.m. And both the Colts and Texans are going to be starting rookie quarterbacks on Sunday. And that is only one of 22 starting positions, right? So in terms of a roster breakdown right now for the Colts versus Texans, there's a lot of similarities in terms of youth and inexperience. Obviously, as we touched on, there's 2 rookie head coaches going at it, D'Amico Ryans for the Texans and then Shane Steichen, respectively, for the Colts, both of which are complete opposite backgrounds. D'Amico Ryans, as many of you may remember, of course, I remember him making several plays against us. He was the stout middle linebacker, or the Mike linebacker, for the Texans during their years of prominence. And I believe he holds pretty much most of, if not all of, their major franchise records that aren't, defensively, that aren't owned by J.J. Watt. It's either D'Amico Ryans or J.J. Watt that owns their records. And, seeing him coach with San Francisco last year, that vaunted defense, just talent at every single position, He's brought that same philosophy, that hard nose, play fast, play physical, play smart, and play hyper aggressive. That same philosophy now with Houston. And as we've seen over the years, it takes maybe a full season or two for a new philosophy and a new way of coaching and playing to really settle in and establish that new culture. But based off what I've seen from, whether it's the Texans social media, preseason games, anything that I've come across, it really seems like the Texans have bought into D'Amico Ryans and what he is bringing, and vice versa. Right now, it seems the Colts have bought into Shane Steichen. So that's just the overall beginning coaching side of it. Player side of it, of course, there's the two quarterbacks. Running back situation is, both squads are young. You've got Damian Pierce for the Texans, whereas right now with the Colts without Jonathan Taylor, we've got guys like Deion Jackson, Evan Hull, but Evan Hull's now on IR. So, we've got Jake Funk and Zach Moss. I can go position by position, but overall to me, the rosters seem very, very similar.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And one thing you mentioned, coming over, bringing that defensive mindset, not only from his playing career, but from the 49ers. I went back and watched some of their week one contest against the Ravens. One thing that really stood out to me with the Texans is, their pass rush looks pretty formidable.
Mm-hmm.
They really got off the edge quick. They were collapsing the pocket on Lamar Jackson, which is not an easy feat, especially with the way that he's able to move. I think they had 4 sacks as a team. So, in terms of what I'm looking at, with the Texans, things to keep an eye on, really that pass rush and how our offensive line handles it.
Yep.
I think that's going to be a key really to hone in on, and that'll really determine, how this game's not only going to go for them, but go for us on offense.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get to key points of victory here a little bit later in this segment. But you brought up a really good point, and I noticed that too with the Texans pass rush. And I can't name too many names off the top of my head, but obviously the one that stands out is the first round pick that followed C.J. Stroud, which is Will Anderson Jr. coming out of Alabama. He was the clear-cut number one defensive end edge rusher coming out in this past year's draft. And between looking at his Pro Football Focus grade, watching the tape, and in and out of plays that he was not a part of and also plays that he was a part of, this kid's the real deal, right? And this kid can anchor their defense for 10 to 12, however long he plays.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of up and down their defensive roster, they're young. And, when you're young, you're coachable or malleable, if you will. And you buy in much more easier than, say, a veteran with 6, 7, 8, 9 years of experience.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Anderson was really impressive in week one. I mean, he had a sack, 6 tackles, two QB hits, and he's going to be playing up against Braden Smith for us. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a really interesting matchup in terms of just looking at the rosters and how we're going to handle that. I mean, luckily, he's going up against Braden instead of Ryman. I think that might be a tough test for Ryman with his speed, but yeah, Braden's really going to have to step up his game and really push the rookie off the ball if we're going to,
Yeah.
have some success there on the line.
And this is where I bring up another area of concern too is even after week one, we're already seeing some injuries on the Colts side of things. Quentin Nelson did not practice both today and yesterday. Braden Smith did not practice on on Wednesday, but Braden was a full participant today, which huge, right? As you're saying,
Yep.
Will Anderson lining up there on the left defensive end, respectively, going against the right tackle for the Colts, which is Braden. So if we're going to need Braden to really lock it down because that kid does have that potential and he does have that speed. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of tight end and running back chips on that side, and as well in the run game running away. But again, I think overall, from what happened against the Ravens, they played Lamar Jackson very well and they kept him bottled up. And I believe they're going to probably bring that same concept in with Anthony Richardson as he has similar speed. Um, Now, this is where you can argue that, oh, well, Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson are not even close to the same page because, Lamar Jackson is a former MVP. Anthony Richardson is a rookie. Their skill sets are completely different. Lamar Jackson is easily much more twitchier, a lot more acceleration in open space. Um, you know, their passing abilities can be debated. There's a lot of folks out there that don't believe Lamar Jackson is an efficient passer. However, I'm on the belief that sure, he may only complete 60% of the passes, but it's his legs that bring that other dimension. And Lamar Jackson can thread the needle. He can. We've seen it over and over again, especially in his MVP year. And Anthony Richardson, while he did complete 65% of his passes this last week, there was still 4 or 5 balls that he sailed or underthrew, and a defense is going to capitalize that one way or another. So I would say for Richardson, he's going to have to really dial it back, hone in his mistakes, really start developing that touch pass as we touched on last week or last episode, excuse me. And I don't know. I'm really curious to see what concepts Shane brings into this game because it's a whole different defense than playing Jacksonville.
Yeah, no, and I'll save it for our keys to victory later. But I've got some ideas just from watching the Texans and Ravens and how the Texans handled some of the concepts that the Ravens chose to run. And I think there's some things there that the Colts can exploit. With Anthony Richardson and some of our wide receivers. But you're absolutely right. It's going to be huge to see not only how our offensive line handles their pass rush and keeps Anthony Richardson upright, but also how he kind of handles their coverages and see if he can be a little bit crisper on some of those mid-range midfield balls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going back and watching the two halves against Jacksonville again, the offense more or less stalled a lot more in the second half than it did in the first half. And I don't, it's too early in the season to really make correlations like this, but based off of the quick numbers that I ran, the number of plays, pre-snap in which Shane Steichen had motion in play, whether it's a simple motion, meaning a guy just goes one direction continuously, or it's a stop and start, meaning he comes in, stops, turns around, goes back out, or it's a dual motion, meaning there's 2 different players that are motioning, one after the other. A lot of the offense's efficiency for us really declined as motion was called less, right? And with Houston being a much younger and much less experienced defense than Jacksonville, I would fully expect Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter to really incorporate more of that motion game to really help Richardson out and to exploit that young defense.
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely seemed like, and I think we mentioned it on our last episode a little bit. It seemed like we kind of ran out of those scripted plays,
Mm-hmm.
and then we got into a little bit more of a ad hoc play calling that you might see with somebody who has a little bit more experience than Anthony Richardson, and I think whatever we can do to set him up for a little bit more success, whether that's more motion, whether that's maybe trying some rollout passes, things like
Yeah, some
that.
bootleg
What
concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever we can do to really ease the burden on him a little bit and make it, you know, a little bit easier for him to, as opposed to just having to read the coverages at the line, and really make those decisions, kind of take that overthinking part of the game out of it for him, at least,
Yeah.
as we get a rhythm.
And I think too with that, adding more of those bootlegs, those, counter play actions and stuff like that, you want your opponent, the defense you're going against to be uncomfortable, right? Because that's when they slip. That's when coverages break. That's when gaps don't get filled on the run, stuff like that. And, I want to see not necessarily less of a script, but more of the type of play calling that as you were saying, simplifies the game for Richardson, but it makes the defense panic and think more. Because I think that's where you can exploit a defense of, I don't want to say they're lower caliber, because I mean everybody is high caliber. Welcome to the NFL, but exploit a younger, more inexperienced defense that can maybe even overthink this or not, or completely busted coverage. And all of a sudden you've got Alec Pierce or you've got Josh Downs running down the seam, and, Richardson plants his back leg and heaves it 55 yards for a touchdown. That's that's what we're hoping to see.
Right.
All right. So so that's Colts offense versus Texans defense. On the flip side, um, Houston Texans offense obviously is centering around their rookie CJ Stroud, who's the number 2 overall pick out of Ohio State. Um, a lot of people even thought going up towards the draft that CJ could have been number 1, just because specifically of how he played against Georgia last year in that semifinal game, which was probably one of the better college football games that I've watched in the last 15 years. CJ Stroud used his legs. He threw everything with precision, with timing, accuracy, and really was in control and dismantling that vaunted Georgia defense that over the last 2 years has pretty much every position has gone in the first round. That's how talented that defense was. And for CJ Stroud to do something like that, there was a point to which, I mean, you and I texted about this and talked about this frequently. Like, oh man, I hope CJ Stroud falls to the Colts just because of how polished of a passer he is. And that Georgia game really cemented that feeling for us. And, Texans took him, and I was like, man, that sucks. Now we got to face him twice a year for the next 15 years, because we know what he could develop into. The real big kicker is on Sunday is CJ Stroud's coming into having completed nearly 64% of his passes as well. He looked efficient against the Ravens. Granted, there were several mistakes that he did make as well, but that's going to be a given with rookie quarterbacks. But CJ Stroud looks the part, and I think we're going to have to defend him in many different levels, both the passing and he can use his legs, although he's much more of a passer than he is a runner compared to Richardson.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up too, because I would allude back to that Georgia game as well, because I root for Ohio State, so I follow them pretty closely, obviously, and you know for the majority of his career at Ohio State, one of the knocks on C.J. Stroud was that he would not use his legs.
Mm-hmm.
He would kind of refuse to leave the pocket. It almost stay there a little too long, even though we knew he was capable of doing it. And I think that Georgia game caught everybody by surprise, and he knew all eyeballs were going to be on him in that game. And he utilized that opportunity to show, hey, I can move. I'm curious to see if that translates to the NFL, though, because, you know, with him and Anthony Richardson, when you put them side by side, it's a tale of two styles, really. Anthony Richardson is closer to a Justin Fields, where he has the capability to throw the deep ball. Maybe he needs to work on his touch a little bit, but he has elite speed. CJ Stroud does not have that,
Mm-hmm.
but he does have an incredible passing ability. So I'm curious to see, you know, what the Colts pass rush looks like and if they put some pressure on him to make some throws, because really that's where CJ Stroud makes his mistakes. If you give him too much time in the pocket, he's going to make throws. He has got probably the best touch of any of the quarterbacks taken in this year's draft. But the Ravens sacked him 5 times. So if we can get in the backfield and rattle his cage a little bit, we're talking about a whole different ball game than if we let him sit back there and sling the ball all around the field.
Yeah, funny you should mention that sack number, because looking at that, it was a combination too of sacks coming around from the outside and coming up the middle, which from my perspective, I believe you can get to CJ Stroud quicker through, guard, center, guard, the A and B gaps. Um, and we have the perfect players to do so with Dio Dangbo, Quiddy Pay, whether it's doing twist stunts on the outside, and then of course, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. at the defensive tackle position. And Buckner showed it last week. When he's on, it doesn't matter who's playing guard, center, guard. Buckner can toss you like a rag doll and wreck your inside game. And see, as you mentioned, CJ Stroud doesn't have that elite running ability in terms of top end speed. And players in the NFL are much quicker to get to, much quicker at the point of attack, going from point A to point B for that quarterback sack behind the line of scrimmage. And, I don't think CJ Stroud has that ability to get outside of the tackles and make that, huge gashing run. Can he take off and run? Yes, but he doesn't, me personally, he doesn't have that elite speed like Richardson or Fields or Lamar Jackson to where, everything collapses in the pocket. You do a 360 turn and GTFO and go right or left. And next thing you know, 40 yards down the sideline, and so I think that's where we can really contain him is if our edge rushers really keep him pinned in on the outside from the outside in, and Buckner, Grover Stewart, Dia, whomever is playing the tackle positions, push that line of scrimmage back in his face.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The pass rush and even more so take it a step further, the secondary, because I thought, the secondary played fairly well against Jaguars. We mentioned it on our last episode. That's a pretty tough wide receiver stable to face. I don't think we're going to see it as strong this weekend with the Texans.
Mm-hmm.
So, if our corners can stay, stay on their man and really force, a little bit extra time in the pocket for Stroud, and we can get a pass rush, we're looking at a really, defensive minded game here. I think, I had that kind of written down in terms of the matchup with the Texans. I really think this might be a defensive struggle on both sides, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. So in terms of the receiving core for the Texans, their top two receivers are Nico Collins and Robert Woods, aka Bobby Trees, respectively. Robert Woods has bounced around the league a little bit the past few seasons. He had a couple all right years with the Rams. I know he had, I believe it was a torn ACL their Super Bowl year. And then last year he was with the Tennessee Titans. Didn't do too terribly much, but had two pretty decent games against the Colts. And historically, Robert Woods has done well against the Colts. Now he's a veteran receiver. I believe he's in his 30s now, early 30s. But he's a tall, very skilled route runner. I believe he's about 6'2", 6'3". He's a big body guy. He's basically Pittman, but older. So I think Robert Woods might be the receiver to watch. On the tight end aspect of it, though, they acquired Dalton Schultz, who is the productive tight end from the Dallas Cowboys last season. So he is their number one tight end. Historically, Colts have not covered tight ends well, especially the Texans tight ends for whatever reason. And they've jumbled name after name throughout that position. But it seems like a Houston Texans tight end always has a really decent game against us and catches a critical touchdown.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think I remember because we had Pharaoh Brown on our
Practice squad.
preseason
Yeah.
practice squad this year, and I'm pretty sure he played for the Texans a few years ago and absolutely ripped us a new one of those
Yeah.
games. So really, it doesn't matter who it is or what their talent level is. Somebody always seems to find a way to kill us from the tight end position.
Yeah. But I agree with you. Our secondary did do as well as they could against the Jaguars. And I hope that they take that momentum and take it into NRG Stadium and really play solid defense against the Texans. Because, like you said, if our secondary can hold up and buy the pass rush enough time to get to CJ Stroud, then our defense may be in for another big day with a few takeaways.
Yep. No, I agree completely. I think it's really going to hinge on, especially for the Colts perspective of this, not only, the Texans because they had a pretty good pass rush, like I mentioned earlier, but from the Colts perspective, keeping your defense off the field as much as you can, because I think, if we rely on them too much in this game, and I'm afraid that we might just from what I saw from both teams last week,
Mm-hmm.
That's where we really struggled in the fourth quarter last week. You can only ask so much out of a defense for 4 quarters when they're on the field
Yeah,
for 36 minutes of game time or whatever.
yeah, and that definitely hurts. But getting into what I'm expecting in this game, um, I fully expect with Richardson now going into his second week, he's got that first week out from underneath him. More install or game planning with the offense and Shane, Jim Bob Cooter, and everybody. Um, this is honestly a week where I fully not expect, but really have a good feeling about the Colts offense showing its capability. Now, me personally, this is all dependent on if we can establish even the remote decency of a run game. And because, what was it, 1.3, 1.4 yards a carry out of the running back position, that's not going to cut it. No matter who you play, no matter what week, where you're at, that is not cutting it. I don't care who you are. So hopefully, with Zach Moss back, he's been a full participant through the last two practices. He seems healthy based off of everything I've heard. It sounds like Zach Moss will be playing. My expectation is that he will. I don't think he will start, but I would say he will probably be getting the majority of the running back touches by the second half. Using that first half to get his legs underneath him, get the game action flowing, get the juices going. And Zach Moss too. Last year, from my memory, he was a good blitz pickup back too. He did well in pass pro, and he has that. He has a good catching ability. Like, I'm not going to say it's elite by any means, but he can catch the ball out of the backfield. And while he's not a burner, he does have decent speed to get into the second level.
Yeah, no, and I think 4 or 5 yard chunk plays. That's all we need out of him. I agree with you. I had it on here. I think we need to establish the run game. That really, in my opinion, that hinges on what we're going to see out of the Colts on Sunday.
Mhm.
I think, like I already mentioned, I think we're in for a defensive battle. So I think you and I maybe disagree a little bit there, but I agree with you that if we are going to see a little bit more of a complete offense, it's going to rely on Zach Moss's ability to open up the run game because maybe Deion Jackson gets another shot, but that was a pretty tough go last week. So maybe he'll have a little bit of a revenge game, but I'm hoping to see more out of Zach Moss, than we did out of Deion Jackson last week.
So, one last thing on the running back side of it. The Indianapolis Colts have had contact with Kareem Hunt and Leonard Fournette. So those are two possible options to come in. For those of you who are unfamiliar with those names, Kareem Hunt has had formed over the last 2 to 3 seasons probably the best 1-2 punch in the NFL with Nick Chubb there in Cleveland. And then Leonard Fournette, who started his career in Jacksonville and then went to Tampa Bay, won a Super Bowl with them and Tom Brady. Leonard Fournette has been a pretty good running back. Same thing with Kareem Hunt. Obviously, they're not elite. Otherwise, they wouldn't be jobless right now. But I think either one of those, whomever you choose, brings a new dimension to the running game. Because neither one of them is terribly up there in age. I believe they're both around 27, 28 years old. But I would be for bringing one of those two in for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what's interesting about those two is, I mean, that's two completely different running styles. You play off Lenny, you're going to get a little bit more of a bruiser,
Mm-hmm.
hard to tackle kind of player. Kareem Hunt, you might be able to, that might be the kind of guy with a Steichen offense where he could flourish with, passes out of the backfield,
Yep.
things like that. So like you mentioned, Zach Moss, maybe not the number one go-to guy out of the backfield for the passing game. So if you bring in a Kareem Hunt, you really kind of have more of a complement there, to give Anthony Richardson more options to throw out of the backfield.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree with you there that Kareem Hunt, I think, would be my 1A choice, just because of that passing element. Because he has shown a dynamic ability, especially way back when he started his career with the Chiefs. Kareem Hunt was a force of nature. both running the ball in between tackles and then catching swing passes out of the backfield. I don't think he's lost a step because he hasn't had any severe injuries. I know both running backs have had their off the field issues in recent years, and I know that's usually a red flag for Colts brass. But I mean, the fact that they're talking to them at least shows that they're willing to accept a little bit of risk and maybe some backlash from some fans out there that may not agree with it. But in terms of a football side of it, you know, I don't think it would be a smart move not to kick the tires on either one of them.
No, I agree completely. I mean, the Colts really need to decide, and I know publicly facing, all you're going to hear is that, we're trying to bring Anthony Richardson along, we're trying to win games. That as a front office, they have to decide what they're going for here. If you want to try to win some games this year, you go out and you sign a Leonard Fournette or a Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
If you're just really trying to bring Anthony Richardson up to speed and you're going to live with whatever results you get this year without spending any extra money or making any trades, then you stick with Zach Moss and Deion Jackson and hopefully Evan Hull comes back off IR and you kind of see what you can get out of them. But I'm of the personal opinion, I don't think anybody, any listeners here, anybody watching the Colts should expect Jonathan Taylor to play another down for the Colts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so kind of my last thought in terms of Colts offense versus Texans defense is I think this is where we have one of the biggest matchup advantages is our receiving core versus their secondary. While they did play well, Baltimore's receiving core is something far from to be desired. Now I know. They've got Odell Beckham Jr. They've got this young kid, Zay Flowers, who's dynamic. But, I personally think that the way they run their offense is it's not conducive for, efficient passing outside of Lamar Jackson to the tight end, Mark Andrews. Now, with the Colts side of it, I believe that if this is a game, and we talked about this, if this is a game for a struggling player that didn't impress us in week one to come out, this is a game for Alec Pierce to come forth and really step it up because they know they saw it on film. Pittman got 11 targets last week, made 8 catches, 90 yards, and took that 39-yard screen to the house. All right, so they know Pittman is a go-to. Josh Downs, another player that could step up more and show more flash. This could be a tight end game. We could throw out, Mo Alley Cox, Ogletree, Will Mallory, whomever, and just tight end them half to death like they do us every other game. But there's a plethora of options here. But I think what needs to happen is, and what I want to see happen is I want to see Steichen utilize motions with the tight ends, with the receivers, create those mismatches coming across the field, because I think that those crossing routes and those intermediate routes are Richardson's bread and butter. We saw it in the preseason. Those quick up-the-seam throws to Kylan Granson, those inside slants to Josh Downs, or the comeback routes to Alec Pierce that we saw over and over and over again in training camp. I believe those are going to be huge, huge passing keys for this one.
Yeah, and I think the guy that I really look at here, Pierce is a good pick, but the guy that I'm looking at, you just mentioned him, Kylan Granson. I really think getting him over the middle, like you said, that seems to be an area where Anthony Richardson feels really comfortable throwing the ball. I think of the tight ends, Kylan Granson's the best route runner, and he's a little bit smaller than some of the other ones, so he's a little bit quicker. I think he could be the kind of guy, Pharaoh Brown tore us up for the Texans a few years ago. I think he could be that same kind of role where he gashes the Texans defense, if they're playing, man coverage on Pittman and Pierce and Downs. I think we could see Granson go for a big day with some easy catches over the middle.
Yeah.
For
And that brings up my curiosity is how is DeMeco Ryans going to call this defense? Is he going to emulate Jacksonville with the continuous 2 high safety and continue man down below? Or is he going to straight play a high 2 zone, like pure zone defense and bring pressure. That's one thing to really look forward to and look out for is how that defense is called against our passing game. Because in all fairness for Jacksonville, that continuous too high safety worked. You know,
Yeah.
and that took away so many deep balls that I don't think Richardson had an air pass over 20 yards. And
Yeah, to be honest with you, man, I think if I'm in his position, if I'm in D'Amico Ryan's position, I think absolutely I start the game in man coverage against the Colts receivers and make somebody beat me,
mhm,
because to our point here with Kylan Granson and the tight ends, why even start in a zone and allow those soft coverage, passes for chunk plays, little chunk plays, especially if we could get Zach Moss running the ball again, for this offense. I think if I'm D'Amico Ryans, I definitely start off in a man-to-man coverage and see really make these Colts wide receivers, beat them down the field
yeah,
before I even try a zone.
yeah, and that so the Colts' ability to win the line of scrimmage, plus the ability to establish a run game, because in order to get out of that too high, you need to establish that run game because that forces safeties to come lower, closer to the box to help support the run game if it is going well, right? Whereas last week we couldn't run the ball worth anything, and so they just sat in that too high. So
Right.
I agree with you there. In terms of, let's get into our keys to victory. And there's several that we can touch on. So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Give me your big keys to win offensively on Sunday.
Yeah, so I mean, starting out, we've mentioned it time and again on this episode. Get the run game going. Get Zach Moss the ball and see if we can establish a run game up the middle. I think that is absolutely going to be the key to opening up our offense, and I think that's the difference between, you know, 28 points, 31 points, and 17 to 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, piggybacking off of that, give AR plenty of time to operate in the pocket. We have to stem the pass rush. The tackles have to show up against their edge rush. That was really the biggest takeaway that I had from rewatching some of the extended highlights of the Texans game. They really got around on the edge quickly. So if we can even, I know Steichen in the past with Jalen Hurts, force those edge rushers outside and run one of those kind of sneaky up the middle runs with Anthony Richardson. Anything we can do to force them, to maybe come back inside and have our guards help a little bit, I think would be huge. And then, lastly, on the offensive side of the ball, you mentioned Zay Flowers earlier. That was a big takeaway I had from the Ravens game was, they utilized that screen game immensely with Zay Flowers, getting the ball down the field effectively. The Texans seem to really struggle in the coverage of screen passes. So, I think we saw some creativity there from Steichen last week.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a really advantageous position for us if we can get some creative wide receiver or tight end screens on the outside against this Texans defense.
Yeah. And so you pretty much took several points that I had, but I'm going to piggyback and build off of the run establishment because I think this is the bread and butter of the Shane Steichen offense, as we saw in Philadelphia or these last couple of years, is if you can start the run game, that opens up the RPOs, run pass options. That also opens up true play action. And I believe the four big types of plays that need to hit are your inside zones, building on into RPOs, and then play action over the middle, up the seam, down the sideline, and the bubble screen yet again. Because, Pittman's not going to break 39 yards every time. Let's be realistic here. Where you mentioned it, and I'm glad that you did with the Zay Flowers, we could utilize Josh Downs in that capacity because he has that breakaway speed and that shiftiness to really slide through the smallest of creases for those screen blocks and shoot up the sideline, right? And so I think that type of a really quick paced offense with the motion creativity, the play action, the run game, the RPOs, and the quick bubble screens. I think all that combined together can open up anywhere from 2 to 5 deep shots that we desperately need to take to keep defenses honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those screenplays and even the inside zone, if you can hammer those, 4 or 5 times, that's how you end up with broken coverages on the back end of a defense, and that's how you end up with, somebody wide open down the field. So I agree completely. That's an area that the Texans seem to really struggle with. So if I'm Shane Steichen, I'm hammering that on Sunday.
Yeah, and I even utilize a tight end screen too, which we've seen run to success a few times. And I've vented this to you over the years is that I wish Frank Reich would have utilized that tight end screen more, both when we had Jack Doyle with Kylan Granson, and even when we get guys like Jelani Woods back and Drew Ogletree consistently. Any one of those three tight ends, utilize them in that tight end screen aspect that you can get the ball out of your hand in less than 1.25 seconds. And next thing you know, you're picking up 8 to 12 chunk yards, and that's huge. Like, I mean, that's not a lot in terms of on the stat sheet, but in terms of the flow of the game, those little chunk plays like that really wear and tear a defense and are very demoralizing. As having played defense myself, those even on the early downs, you get 7-8 yards on first down. That sets you up for a short, like a 2nd and 2, a 2nd and 3, to where you can take a shot and then call one of your better plays to get that short third down conversion.
Yeah, and I think you kind of alluded to it there a little bit earlier. I mean, I think we've got the personnel to run those types of plays too. I mean, I personally probably would not run, tight end screen to Mo Alley Cox or even really Drew Ogletree, but I think Will Mallory, if
Mm-hmm.
he's active, Will Mallory and Kylan Granson are the perfect kind of guys for that because they have just enough speed to really break it out for 15, 20 yards if they can get, an open seam. So, those are the kind of weapons. And I was kind of scratching my head before the start of the season, when we saw the 53 man and we kept 5 tight ends. But, you know, I see now a plan developing to where
Yep.
we can utilize these types of guys to really open up the offense.
Yeah, and that really makes it exciting going into Sunday. Now, real quick here on the defensive side, we honed on this a little bit already. Um, my defensive takeaways is obviously we need to contain C.J. Stroud and make sure that his rhythm is messed up, which in order to do that, it's getting pressure in 2 seconds or less. It's stopping the run game, both inside and outside. And, when the pass rush can't get home immediately, our coverage on the outside needs to really stay honest, right? And what I mean by being honest is not drifting away from your zone coverage, because in the cover 3 scheme, it is really dependent on everybody being very strict in their assignments, because the cover 3 takes away those sideline routes. It takes away, the middle of the field and the dump off routes, right? And so I think if we can really make CJ Stroud hold the ball, then our defense is in for a really good day.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. That was my defensive key to victory. I only had really the one because I think it's so critical is the pressure on CJ Stroud. I mean, the Colts in week 1, I only had a 24% pressure rating, which is not very good. So I think, a guy that I alluded to on the last episode, Dio Dengbo, maybe this is his game where he can show up and make some plays. And if we can get some more pressure on CJ Stroud and really force him into, making some bad throws, I think that's really the key for our defense, because I don't think we're going to see a ton of scrambling out of him. So I think there's going to be opportunities. If the Texans' offensive line struggles, there's going to be opportunities for us to make some plays in their backfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going to be. I think it's going to be a really, really good interdivision battle, and it's really a key battle too. And what I mean by this is that 1-1 feels a lot better than 0-2. Yeah, I mean, we've been burdened with an 0-2 record. It feels like for a decade plus. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why it's been we can't win games first part of the season, but it would really be nice to come out of the first quarter of the season being 500 or better. You know what I mean?
No, I agree completely. I think, it seems like 2 years ago I had season tickets, so I was going to, most of the games, and we started off the year against the Seahawks and the Rams 0-2 right off the bat. It's like, man, that's a demoralizing start. Two winnable games
Yep.
that we were in till the end. It's just a mental block really for the players, I can imagine too. So I agree completely. I think we'll find out a lot about what the Colts are made of for the rest of this season because this does not get any more winnable on their schedule. I would, argue.
Yep.
So this should be one that they can pick off if they can really get their offense humming on the road.
Mm-hmm. All right. Got a few minutes here left here. All right, JB. So let's get into our predictions. All right. I'll let you shoot this one off first. Give me your game score, player of the game, and reasoning behind all of this.
So I've got the Colts winning 20-17. Like I said, I think that we're looking at more of a defensive game, and I think you could say a defensive game would be a little bit lower score. I think it's all relative in the NFL. I think anything under 40 points I would consider usually a pretty low scoring game. So I'm going to take the Colts to win 20-17. I do think their defense prevails over the Texans' defense. I think we have a better game than they do. Uh, I'm not so sure what to expect out of our offense, but in terms of a player of the game, I am going to give it to Anthony Richardson. I do think that he leads us to a victory, and I think his play will determine the win here. I could see him making a game-winning drive to kick a field goal or something like that. So that's kind of where my head's at. I would like to see him get his first win on the road against the Texans and keep the trend going.
I like that. So I'm kind of in a bit of a different boat than you, and we slightly alluded to this at the beginning of this. Um, so right now, for all of you sports bettors out there, right now here is the current line. Houston has a 1 point favorite, so it's Houston -1 right now. Over under sitting at 39.5. Right. Um, what that means is the combined score of Houston and Indianapolis is going to be either over or under 39.5 points. Me personally, I would take the over on that. And I would also take the Colts +1. And here's my reasoning for that. So offensively, I believe that we have a more dynamic capability than Houston. Defensively, this is where I would give the Colts a much bigger advantage, is just because of our defensive prowess. Our linebacking core is much, much, much stronger, in my opinion, with Zaire, Shaq Leonard, and EJ Speed. Secondary, you can flip a coin, honestly. And then defensive line is where I really give the edge to the Colts outside of edge rusher, interior pressure with Buckner, Grover Stewart, Tyquan, Dio. I think that's going to be the biggest advantage that we have. Now, on the offensive side, is as I was alluding to with being dynamic. Again, Richardson, you said Richardson being the key player in this game. I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm still going to keep the key player on offense, but I'm going to bang the table for Alec Pierce on this one because my personal thought is Pittman's going to be double covered as he was the favorite target. They're going to try and take away those middle of the field routes, and it's all going to have to be, or not all of it, but a lot of the work is going to have to come on those outside bubble screens, on the comeback routes on the outside, and any sort of quick turn curls, inside leaking routes, anything of that nature, which Alec Pierce excels at. So I'm going to say the Indianapolis Colts pull this one out and they score 27 to Houston's 23.
I think that's I think what you're doing here is you're taking our last episode where I picked on Alec Pierce and you're like, he talked enough trash about him that the guy's gonna have a stud game
Hey,
now.
I'm gonna put the magic out there in the universe. All right, I'm gonna pump some good juju towards him. You know, I like the kid. I really want the kid to succeed. So this is me giving that success to him. Uh,
No, I agree with you completely. I think you're on to something there. As much as I gave him some rough marks in week one, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense because, Pittman can't go for 100 yards in every game. They're going to start double covering him. So somebody's going to end up being open, whether that's Downs or Pierce. And, Pierce has a lot to prove. So I think that's a good pick.
mm-hmm. And with everybody being so concerned about him only getting 3 targets, and everybody keeps asking about Alec Pierce's involvement in the offense. I've seen this game before. Shane and other members of the coaching staff have been like, yeah, Pierce actually did play a great game. And real quick here, I know I'm kind of going off topic a little bit from game prediction, but I went back and I did watch a little bit more of the Colts Jacksonville games, and Alec Pierce was actually um, doing a lot more than people were seeing, right? Because you're so focused on watching Anthony Richardson. I went back and slowly watched Pierce for several plays, and Pierce, while yes, he's going out on routes, he's also maintaining his block in the run game. Now, the run game didn't go anywhere, but he's maintaining his block and his assignment on the outside. And that's, I think, where they were alluding to Pierce had a good game, whereas he may have not gotten targets thrown to him. He was doing what he was supposed to. And so
Yeah.
I can really, I've seen this before. They did this, several years ago with, I think it was before Pierre Garcon blew up. Um, you know, they were, everybody was like, why is Pierre Garcon starting? He's not making much of an impact. And Peyton came out and said, like, hey, I trust 85. And everybody, a lot of diehard Colts fans remember the story. Pierre Garcon became a legitimate deep weapon after that. Because,
Yep.
whether it was they started game planning with him, I don't know what it was. I just have that feeling that this is kind of that same scenario with Pierce. And I hope I'm right.
I hope you're right too, man. I want there's nothing I want more than to be wrong about Pierce, and I want him to come out and 125 yards with 8 catches and a touchdown or something like that. But now I have before we jump off here, I do have one final thought, one bonus thought on this game. And it's easy to focus on Anthony Richardson being, top 5 pick, rookie quarterback for the Colts, future of our organization. It's easy to forget we have a rookie head coach too.
Yes.
I think there were some intangibles, that Shane in his first game as head coach last week, things that probably he could clean up too. So one thing I want to point out, I think he takes the points this week. I don't think we see as many risky fourth down plays. I think we take the points this week, and I think that contributes to the win.
Okay. I I like that take. I like that take. While I still think that Shane will be aggressive on the fourth and shorts, especially around the midfield, I can definitely see, a couple more punts or a couple more field goal opportunities just, because you need to score points to win a ball game. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, this is going to conclude episode 4. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Blake Waters alongside Jordan Brock. We'll come back at you again with a post-game reaction and a breakdown of what our eyes saw. Until then, please enjoy the game. Stay safe. Everybody take care.